Hello.
Welcome back
to Historia, the podcast.
Wah, wah, wah.
I should get some sound effects so we can get like an applause after that.
I appreciate it.
Everyone's like, whoa, yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening today. It's going to be a very interesting topic that we're discussing.
I'm Jamie.
I'm Kiley.
Just had to make sure we put our names.
Yeah, we forget that sometimes. So we're recording in the mid-afternoon. This is not like us.
It's bright out. My eyes hurt.
I know, the sun's out. It's so different than usual.
It's still cold and gross.
Yeah, it's just like we need winter to end, but it's not ending. So
Never ending.
never. God. Anyway, hope you all are doing fantastic. Living your best life. And I don't know what else.
How are you doing?
Me?
Yes.
I'm great. I feel really loud today.
Great.
Great. Okay.
You always say that you're too loud. I'm always too quiet.
How do we like not do that?
I just supposedly I feel like at work I have a very loud voice because I can't ever hear anybody. But
Yeah.
I feel like I'm always talking super loud. But then when I talk to normal people, it's just like I feel like I'm too quiet.
Okay.
Everybody just needs to start screaming at one another.
Hey! I mumble a lot. I don't know. But I think the microphone just helps me because then I'm like, hello. Like I'm like talking. I'm like more focused on how I'm talking.
Yeah.
But in real life, I'm just like, no. That's not true. But kinda.
You do talk pretty loud.
I do. Yeah, I am a pretty loud person. I'm sorry. But whatever. Anyway.
I apologize for that.
Jamie and I are hanging out today. Like we're not just recording. We're hanging out. Isn't that exciting?
We're going to a super fun bar.
Yes, Alice in Wonderland themed.
It's pretty cool. They change it like every 2 months.
Yeah, they're doing Harry Potter next, I think.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'll skip that one.
me too. I'm really sad I missed the Star Wars one and the Stranger Things. But
I heard it was pretty cool.
yeah, but like, I don't know. Anyway, we're going to Alice in Wonderland today.
We're going to the Mad Tea Party.
Yes, we are.
So that should be fun.
Speaking of mad,
Oh,
should we jump on into my topic?
segue.
So I did what you usually do, like European stuff.
Yeah,
And I was like, I should have just gave this one to Jamie.
it can be hard.
Yeah, because it was just like so much war stuff. And I was
Yeah.
just like, ugh. But anyway, it's going to be a good episode because I'm talking about somebody who is my favorite character in Hamilton. Most people's favorite character in Hamilton. And he was known to be the last king of America. And he's known to be mad.
Okay.
Yes.
I know who you're talking about, but I can't remember the name. I didn't really care much for colonial.
No, that's fair. Today's episode is about King George the Third.
The third.
Yes. So if you've ever watched Hamilton, he's the one who sings, "You'll be back." He goes, da 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 da. Da, 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 da. I always am inspired by musicals, I swear. But
I still have yet to watch it.
yeah. So what led me to this topic was, of course, Hamilton, but I teach a Hamilton class.
Really?
Yeah, and the other day we were talking about King George and how he's known to be mad and had all these mental disorders and everything. And I was just like, I feel like he might be misunderstood because we didn't have access to mental health back then. So then I was like, I need to learn more about him. So I did that.
Were you wrong?
No.
What?
Was I wrong about what?
That he was misunderstood? Or was he actually
I think he was. I do. I think he was. So we're going to talk about the Mad King. And I thought it segued well into Alice in Wonderland.
When you said the Mad King at first, I thought you were talking about Game of Thrones.
Girl, I've never seen that show. Can I Oh my god, I just realized you can rotate this. Okay, so most of my sources came from British websites because of course, right? I tried to watch a few documentaries and they were really boring and I was just like, because it's always just like, when France was in this area, they took over, and it was just like, why are you talking like this? So I got my sources from royal.uk, britannica.com, which is like, you have to decipher everything. It's like a whole different language. I'm just like, and then hrp.org, which was a really big helpful one. And I think it was like on the UK page. So anyway, we're going to talk about the Mad King, George William Frederick.
Oh, okay.
I love saying their full names because it just takes away from like their power. It's funny. So George III was born on June 4th, 1738 in London, Westminster to be exact. He was the eldest son of Frederick, Prince of Wales, who was ruling since 1727, and Princess Augusta of Saxe-Gotha, I think is how it's pronounced, from a German family. He was second in line to the throne growing up, and he was taught to not like his grandfather, George II, because he had like really bad policies. And he's like, I don't agree with him, so I'm going to be a different king. I'm going to be better than him.
That's what they all say.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of life-changing things happened while George was on the throne. So you're going to notice it's like during the time. For example, the Revolutionary War. So like there's just a lot of things that happened during his reign that were just like life-changing. Mm-hmm. So that's why he's really well known. He grew up very sensitive. He had lots of feelings, and many people did misunderstand him because he wasn't like your typical boy. Like he just like kind of like wanted to do the arts and didn't really care about sports and didn't really care. I don't know what sports they were doing back then.
Rugby.
Yeah.
Cricket.
Oh, yeah. Cricket will come up later. We'll talk about it. So, but he was just more into like sitting and like writing down his feelings and reading books and different things like that. So a lot of people were like, he has issues. And a lot of people actually considered him to have slow mental development just because he had a harder time talking than other people. He was just a little bit behind other people. So they were like, he's dumb, basically.
I mean, it happens.
I know. I'm like, guys, relax. So personally, I don't think he had any like, what's the word? Stint? No. Stunt? I don't know.
Growth stunts?
Yeah, whatever. Like a growth stunt. I don't think he had any of that with his like mental ability. I think he was just like...
It took him a little bit longer.
Yeah, which is fine. And it's also okay that he's more sensitive.
Well, how much inbreeding was going on in the family anyway? Cousins marrying cousins? That's what happened in the royal line.
That is the tea. Get it? Tea? Okay. Anyway. Okay, so he couldn't read until he was 11. So I forgot to mention that part, but maybe that will change your mind. But I mean, again, it's not like they had education like we do now. Not saying we have a good education system, but like, I feel like we teach reading quicker nowadays. Yeah. And it's just more like...
Well, it wasn't really needed for them, especially like, it was mostly for scholars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So him and his family were really close growing up, and they really cared about each other. And King George, I guess I should just call him George at this point. He's not king yet. But George III just really wanted to do what his parents asked. He was just constantly like, what do you need? What can I do? And he just really like listened to them. So he was trying to train for being a king one day. Mm-hmm. Even if he like wasn't sure how that would work. He never really felt confident in it. But he was like, I'm just going to try to learn from you and see what happens. So when he was 12, unfortunately, George's father died, leaving him as the heir to the throne. And there's multiple ways that he could have died. It's hard to know for sure. But one of them is that there was a cricket ball that was flung into his throat.
How?
And so his lung like burst open.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that was one theory. I don't remember the others, but
Poison.
yeah, but they know like something happened in his throat.
Oh.
I know. I'm like, interesting. Could be poison.
Dun, dun, dun. George did it.
Yeah, he wanted to be king so bad. He did not. So when he was preparing to become the king on his 18th birthday, he had a lot of feelings that he would not be good enough. He started feeling really insecure. I don't blame him. It's a lot of pressure, especially to know that your entire life, like, it's already figured out for you and like you can't mess this up.
Yep.
So he's just sitting there like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to be a good king. I'm just really nervous. And but he kept this determination about him that he just like wanted to grow, and he wanted to look up to other people to help him. And so he wanted to improve. He didn't have a big ego, which I think is good because that's how he was forever. He ends up becoming more confident, but he always just had this like this thing about him that made him want to grow and be a better person. So that made him pretty good. But he began to torment himself about it, and he's like, you're not good enough. You're stupid. You're going to be a bad king.
Aw.
I know. I'm like, poor kid. So that brings in John Stuart, which was the 3rd Earl of Bute, and they were kind of like friends forever, basically. Like he was just in his life forever. But he was like his teacher, the inspiration. He became a chief minister later on too. And so he really looked up to him because he knew like how to lead people, and he taught him that way. So John really helped him gain his courage to keep seeking confidence in himself, which is so sweet. Gotta have that person because your dad's dead.
Oh,
in case you forgot. Anyway, so at his accession in the midst of the 7 Years' War in 1760, this was the beginning of his reign, was during the 7 Years' War. So it was just like, hey, welcome in. All right, good luck with this. Because that would last until 1763, and he became king in 1761.
That blows.
Yeah, right in the middle. And of course, this was the war between Great Britain and Prussia on one side, and then France, Austria, and Russia on the other side. And King George did not feel ready to take on the stress. I put a sad face.
Well, yeah, he's 18. He's a child.
Right. So it's like, what do you expect? He was the first Hanoverian monarch, and he was the first to be born in England and have English as his first language. So he also spoke German, and then later on, I think he learned Spanish. So he was just like pretty well-rounded, but his family was German.
Oh.
His mom was. She was a German queen. I really can't breathe right now. Okay. What am I allergic to? Life.
Would not be surprised.
Okay, so people didn't think of him as smart, but he had a huge interest in things such as music, astronomy, clocks, painting, reading, chess. He even learned French. It was not Spanish, it was French. So he was just like pretty well-rounded. He liked picking up new skills, and he just wanted to keep learning new things.
Learning a language is hard.
Yeah. So, and he knew he wanted to be able to communicate with more people. So that's why he chose to learn French. So probably to threaten all the French people.
Yeah. I mean,
it's probably why. He's like, Napoleon. Jean.
Napoleon wasn't even in rule yet.
I know, I'm talking about later. So the reason he became king in 1761 was because that's when his grandfather had finally died. So his grandfather actually lived longer than his dad, basically.
Yeah.
So he was still like on the throne until 1761. And his grandfather was mostly, and this was King George II. He's mostly blind and deaf at the point of his reign being at the end. He went through some things.
Why would you let him still be on the throne?
I know. He's just like, where am I? Just like Helen Keller. He's just like, ah. Okay, sorry. I should not make fun of her. Okay, so he would rule for 60 years during a time where Europe and the world experienced the most change. And so now we're entering into King George III's reign. Transition music. Okay.
Boop, boop, boop.
Ba-ba-ba-bow-bow. Okay, so in 1763, peace was secured on favorable terms for New Britain. This acquired New France, which is future Canada, for those who don't know, and France's trading posts along the Indian coastline. So we're going to talk about France. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. I need to stop. Okay. See, this is too serious of a topic for me. I need like something less serious. Okay. So France remained Britain's biggest rival throughout George's life. Of course, if you know anything about Britain, you know about France and vice versa.
France hated everybody and everybody hated France.
Yeah.
Same with Britain. Everybody hated Britain.
Yeah. They're just like two big forces that they only liked each other or themselves. Not each other. They hated each other. But Britain only liked Britain and France only liked France.
Oh, yeah. The judgment. Oh, my God.
I know. Oh. It's like two mean girls being in the same school.
Oh, my God. It's the worst.
So there was another issue. He needed a wife. And he didn't really want one. But he's like, oh, dang it. I need one because I need to secure the succession. So he's interested in this lady, Sarah Lennell. In late 1750s, he's like, she's smoking. But unfortunately, he was convinced by his family to marry a German princess instead. They were like, not good enough. And so then they gave him a list of German princesses. And one stood out to him. Princess Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. I don't know how to speak German. I'm sorry. Strelitz. I don't know. Now, what's crazy about this, and that's actually not that crazy because it happened with the royal family and it happened a lot back then, was that they didn't meet each other until their wedding day, which is just, it was common, but it's just, yeah. And that was in September 1761. So it was like, hey, you're king. Okay, time to get married. You know how it goes.
The huge.
Yeah. Now, Princess Charlotte was not a beauty. Many people did not really see her beauty, see her as a queen, but she was really smart. And she had a good education. So they were like, yeah, she's good. But she didn't know English when she got to marry him for the first time.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So she had to learn English as she continued on as queen.
And it wasn't even the English we speak now.
Right.
It was worse.
Oh, God, yeah. I think it's difficult now. I'm like, oh, geez, back then. Whew. This couple had 15 children together throughout their life.
Damn.
15 kids and counting. Starring George III. They should have their own show. And he was never unfaithful to her.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's shocking.
Yeah. I mean, like, a lot of his life was kind of taken away from him in some ways, which we'll get to, but like, yeah, I think he just like, he left her and he wanted to have kids with her, and yeah, that was that.
He was busy doing arts and crafts.
Exactly. He's like, I gotta paint this picture and and play my instruments.
Play my flute.
Yeah, he did. He played the flute. So during the 16th and 17th centuries, England subsumed Scotland and Ireland, although Ireland had different ideas about religion, which we'll talk about later. So I'm going to kind of be jumping back and forth, like George's life to like what's going on in the world, to like history of Europe and everything, just to kind of understand the circumstance. So England also had a few civil wars in the 17th century and a very strong political system. Were you wanting to say something? Like you have something to say.
It's just Ireland and Scotland hated Britain on a new level. Oh, yeah. Like probably worse than France.
So true. Oh. Power was held between the monarchy, parliament, and nobility, unlike countries like France and Russia, where they only had a monarchy. So the British Navy was the strongest in the 18th century out of all the navies, and it continued to be like the strongest naval force. Mm-hmm. That's something to keep in mind for later. England also now held capitalism and proto-industry, so they were kind of becoming more advanced with all of that. Mm-hmm. So in London, this was the capital of finance and trade. So they're making more money, they're being able to sell more things, so it's becoming a pretty hopping place. The British Empire held many possessions in North America, the Caribbean, and India. They had things all over the place. And George at least knew that no matter what, he would rule over a strong nation. So he was sitting in a pretty good spot. He's like, it's going to be fine. We got this.
It's going to be fine. Famous last words.
Right? So Britain had a divided parliament where there was a lot of tension between the monarchy and aristocracy. I can never say that word. Aristocracy.
There you go.
On one side. And then the gentry, which is like the upper middle class and the highest class. And then, which is the bourgeois?
Bourgeoisie.
Bourgeois?
How'd you spell it?
Is it bourgeoisie?
Yeah.
They told me bourgeois. They lied.
Well, I guess was it a British person?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know what I'm trying to say. And then the merchant classes on the other side. So we have like the higher class and then like the more middle class on the other side, basically. And they were wanting more political power on that side. So the power of the monarchy and nobility had been reduced during the civil wars of the 17th century. Parliament was the main part of the government in England because of this, but the king and nobility were still very influential. They were still there, even though they weren't like the most important part.
Yeah.
Britain was one of the first places to have different political views coexisting, which caused problems at this time. Usually it's like, not everybody agrees on the same thing, but usually it's like, okay, this is the way of life. Let's just stick with it.
Yeah.
But Britain was starting to like have these two different sides, and they're like, what do we do? There's too many problems happening. So we had the Whigs versus the Tories, and the Whigs were known as the stronger parliament that were the benefiting merchant class, and then the Tories were the more conservative. Most were more in favor for the monarchy. Look how I wrote monarchy. We just take a minute.
Looks like you put a heart.
It does. I've never written this bad before. So the Tories were the more conservative, and most were more in favor for the monarchy, usually consisting of a lot of nobles as well. So they're like the rich. They're like, oh, yes, the king.
That's exactly how they spoke.
The Whigs are like, the Tories are like, oh.
So they're French.
Apparently. Okay, so John Stuart, the third Earl of Bute, who I was talking about earlier, John, good old John, his teacher. Yes. He was the head of a new Tory government. Now, he was also a Scottish lord and the family friend of the royal family, so he really was like their tight BFF. He's like, hey, I'm here. I'm going to create a new Tory government. And they were like, okay, cool. So he became like a very influential person just because he knew the royal family really well. Mm-hmm. Rumors started going around that John and George's mother were in a relationship since George's dad had died. So they probably were, but there's not like any quote unquote proof. Yeah. So, but I mean, it would make sense if he's a close family friend. You know what I mean?
Behind closed doors.
Exactly. So the Whigs won a majority in the parliament in the 1760s, but no government cabinets lasted for long until William Pitt the Elder formed a cabinet in 1766. So William's entering the picture, and he's like, what's up? Now, he was one of a few who ran Britain's state affairs during George's reign. So he was like the one in charge. I think it was like 18 years during his reign. He dominated state affairs in the 1760s before Tory leader Lord North served as prime minister between 1770 and 1782. Then Pitt, oh my God, these are like tongue twisters. Pitt the Elder's son, William Pitt the Younger,
oh my God,
dominated the British politics in 1780s and the 1790s. Once I started getting to this part, I was just like, oh my God. All these British people, go away. Okay. If you're British, I love you. I'm just saying old British stuff. It was a lot of research, guys. A lot of research.
Government topics are never fun.
I know, because I'm just like, is this important? I can't tell. So I had to kind of like pick and choose. This sounds important. So Pitt the Elder's career peaked in the 1750s during the final years of George II's reign. So he was kind of the one who hung out with George II, and then Pitt the Younger was more so with like George III, basically. The new and improved edition.
Ooh.
Sparkly new toy. So when George III first became king, he was inspired by Pitt the Elder's passionate belief in Britain imperial destiny, and this led him to invest a lot in the 7 Years' War against France. So he like helped him feel confident about it. And he's like, we got this. And he started like understanding what to do and how to help. I almost said how to help France, not how to help France, how to help Britain throughout the war. So Pitt actually ended up resigning in 1768 because of the king's meddling in the parliament and the big influence of the Earl of Bute. So the one who was with King George III for 18 years was William Pitt the Younger. Just want to make that clear because there's two of them. So let's talk about Queen Charlotte for a bit because we kind of just like skipped past it. We were like, they got married. But let's talk about her. So obviously she doesn't have much to do. She doesn't have much of a job.
Yeah.
Obviously she has to, provide heirs. And that's pretty much it. So she was good at this. She was very fertile. And so I think he chose a pretty good woman. She had 2 future kings of England amidst their 15 kids, which were Prince George and Prince William. And they kind of have this competition who's going to have a kid first.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So she had the job to educate her family and attend court occasions that she would set up in the Buckingham House, which is now the Buckingham Palace. So this new home was bought for her by the king. So King George III is actually the one who bought the Buckingham Palace.
Wild.
I know. He was also really into architecture. So he had this whole plan of like, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to renovate everything? That was like one of his biggest passions. This guy, I'm telling you, talent. Multi-talented. See, he didn't have time to cheat on his wife.
He was busy decorating.
No, but it makes sense because usually the ones who cheat are just like, I'm not going to do anything.
Literally.
But he was too busy. So she loved to read and loved music. And that's really what caused them to bond right away, was because even though he knows German at least, so they could communicate. But like, that's really what caused them to develop a relationship, is they got to play music together, which is really cute. And she also had a huge group of women friends who were also interested in literature and the arts. So they had like, I don't know, not like a book club, but like today's version of a book club, like got around, probably did music together, talked about famous pieces of literature. So it was good that she had friends. She wasn't like isolated from everyone.
That's good.
Yeah. George actually ends up being more isolated than she ever was. So we'll get there. But George and Charlotte both joined the royal band in music making. So they both played the harpsichord, which is basically like a keyboard. It's like a piano, except you pluck the strings instead of like hitting the keys. So it's like a guitar piano. That's what I call it. Or a harp piano, if you want to call it that. George also played the flute. Yeah. Yeah, he's over there. Charlotte stayed devoted to George even when he became ill and difficult to live with. And when I say difficult to live with, impossible to live with. So she was devoted till the end. And they loved each other. And they also loved their children. And they were always very close to them. And their priority was that the kids had a good education, and they wanted it to be more progressive. Back then, they had a very like progressive mindset. Like, you might be a woman, but you're going to learn this. Obviously, they were trained in different ways. They trained their sons and their daughters in different ways. But like, they wanted their daughters to believe that they could do more. Yeah, which I love. So, trying to stay out of the public eye, the children stayed in multiple houses, which would be difficult. It's already hard being in the royal family, but then to like have to go from house to house.
Ugh.
Yeah. So that's another reason why George wanted to build other places for them to live so that they could kind of all be in the same place.
I mean, when you have 15 kids, you're going to need 15 bedrooms, or at least 17.
Right. Now, the oldest boys, George and Frederick, stayed at Kew Palace, where their father grew up, because they're in training, obviously.
Oh.
We had to protect them at all costs. Now, here are their 15 children.
Okay.
Him. And I'm going to give their future name, basically, like, well, some of them, like what titles they get in the future. So we have George the Fourth, Frederick, Duke of York, William the Fourth, Charlotte, Princess Royal, Edward, Duke of Kent, Princess Augusta Sophia, Princess Elizabeth, Ernest Augustus, King of Hanover, Augustus, Duke of Sussex, Adolphus, King of Cambridge, Princess Mary, Duchess of Gloucester, Princess Sophia, Prince Octavius, Prince Alfred, and Princess Amelia.
They all survived?
They survived the childbirth part, but not. They didn't. Some of them didn't live very long, unfortunately. But for the most part, they actually did. They lived a pretty long life. Now, just to give you perspective, the oldest son, King George the Fourth, was born in 1762, and their youngest was born in 1783.
Dang.
So they had 15 kids in 21 years.
Damn.
Yeah. It was wild.
They were busy.
They were.
She was pregnant a lot.
Pretty much like her whole life, yeah.
How could her body recover after that?
I don't know. And I was looking throughout the years. I didn't write the years down here, but it was like every year a new kid. And I was just like, oh my God. Oh, poor woman. But she loved it. She loved being a mom. So, gave her something to do. You get this big old palace. Might as well.
It probably kept her healthy, too.
Yeah. Although George reigned for 60 years, he became most famous for the rebellion beginning in the British colonies in the 1770s, leading to the U.S. declaring their independence from Britain.
Ah, shit.
Yeah. Well, there's actually a few topics that we've talked about here, like Jamestown. Because we know in 1607, Jamestown in Virginia was the first permanent colony. And by the 1620s, it became a huge plantation based on tobacco and cotton. So I'm kind of talking about the U.S. now and how that has to do with it. But to the north of it, the first British settlers arrived in New England in 1620. And many more people began settling in Boston. I don't know how to do it. Boston. That was like, I don't know what that was. In the next few decades, the colonies expanded outwards into new settlements like Rhode Island, Connecticut, New England, and the Carolinas that were from Virginia. So they kind of were going out in two separate areas. And more colonies were settled in Baltimore in what would become Maryland. Now, the Quaker colony led by William Penn would later become Pennsylvania. So it was like colony, 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 colony. All of these things were happening. New Amsterdam, of course, was renamed to New York. And the British secured almost all the land from New England south to Georgia by the end of the 17th century. The 13 colonies were difficult to rule over, but now they were created. So then the British people were like, you know what? We should be the ones in Parliament for the 13 colonies since we have to pay taxes. Like, we should be the ones in charge, basically. So they wanted complete control over them. So the 13 colonies became wealthy because of the large taxes generated by the slave plantations, RIP, and the proto-industry flourishing in cities. All kinds of things were going on.
Oh, yeah.
So the local powers were taken away from the colonies and London gained more control. Now there were large taxes, including the Stamp Act of 1765, which basically just told people that they have to pay more taxes. And they were like, no!
Ugh.
Yeah, just what we need. And of course, this tension would soon lead to a war. So in the 1770s, the American colonies began to rebel against the British rule. Just to give you an idea, there were 8 million people living in England and 2.5 million people living in the colonies. So that's like... Obviously, England is bigger.
Yeah.
But that's not a bad amount for, like, just being created. So the Stamp Act caused violence. And then, of course, we have the Tea Act.
Oof. Everybody loves their tea.
I know. So the Tea Act was intended to facilitate the British East India Company huge amounts of tea in the warehouses in London, in which they sold to the American colonies. The market mostly had smuggled tea instead of the imported tea, and they were like, oh, how dare you? You must get it legally. So this obviously caused more tension. So you have probably heard this before. In Boston on December 16th, 1773, the protesters attacked the British East India Company and dumped large amounts of tea into the Boston harbor. When England found out about the Boston Tea Party, as it was later called, George and the government passed the Boston Port Act in March 1774, closing a port of Boston to all ships, even those that were legally operating, punishing basically everybody for the actions of these protesters. Mm-hmm. So George was reigning during that. It's just like all these big events. So that's why I was talking about the 13 colonies, because George was right there.
Yep.
He's right there through all of this. So the colonies sent representatives to the newly formed parliament of their own. They're like, we're gonna try to make one on our own. We got this. Mm-hmm. Now, the First Continental Congress was they met in fall of 1774 in Philadelphia, and they sent a petition to George calling for a repeal of how the government was punishing them because of the Boston Tea Party. They, of course, did not think it was fair. Now, George was too busy. He's like, I'm doing so many things. Plus, it's really hard to, like, get messages in time.
Yeah.
So he actually, he received that a little bit too late. There was a big amount of military conflict happening between the supporters of the Continental Congress and the British troops in North America, leading to, of course, the American Revolutionary War. If you're a Hamilton fan... I need to stop talking about musicals on here. So, on April 19th, 1775, in the Massachusetts... Did you just hear me? I said Massachusetts. On April 19th, 1775, in the Massachusetts Bay, this is where the war started. And it went on for 8 years. Many debate the way that King George acted in the war. Many people think that he was he didn't care about his people at all. And so this kind of gave him a bad name because, of course, you're going to blame the one who's
participating, kind of driving it.
Right. So it was all his fault. So just a few examples of kind of how people were gossiping about him. There was a pamphlet written by political theorist Thomas Paine in 1775 called Common Sense. And in this, he referred to George as the royal brute, which was known to be the crude, insensitive, terrible guy, arguing in favor of the colony. So he's saying the colonies, they're fed up. They want to be able to have their own area. And then he's saying that George doesn't care about them and only wants the British to be happy. And this became the most sold out story at that time. Everyone's read it. Everyone was talking about it. And if we put it into numbers now, it would have been the most sold out story in America, just for how many people read it. So, and then of course we had the Declaration of Independence, in which Thomas Jefferson wrote about how King George had a plan to enslave all Americans. And so you're hearing all these different perspectives from the Americans, and you're hearing oh yeah, he's going to kill all of us. He's going to ruin all of our lives. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's not going to be a good name for King George, but the British people really trusted him and they loved him. They're I'm on George's side. He's got us. He's going to protect us. Not much he can do, but
no.
But it just goes to show America was not a fan of him. They did not trust him.
Well, I mean, when you're that far away in distance,
yeah,
no, it's just not going to happen.
Right. When he became king in 1760, 1761, the situation was already rough. They were paying off for the 7 Years' War against France, in which they lost many manpower and resources. And he's just I don't know how to recoup from that. That was a lot. Right. So in September 1775, he's trying to come up with ways that they can get more money. He's oh gosh, we just need to be better. This has been not a good loss for us. And so he's speaking publicly about wishing he could have prevented the war. He's always been a feelings guy, like I said. Mm-hmm. So he thinks the cure to the war is just to be I wish it didn't happen. Right.
Oh, no.
It's okay, what? You can only say that so much.
You need to have a strategy.
Right. You can't just say oh man, I'm sorry.
Sucks.
Yeah. I'm sorry for everyone that lost their lives.
I'm going to go eat a bonbon.
I'm going to go paint. So, yeah, but he wanted to make it very clear that, like, his strategy is not war. He's never really believed in war, and he just, like, he's one of those kings that's just like, I want everyone to get along. And obviously, that's just not going to work, except France. He wants France dead. So, in 1776, we had the Second Continental Congress meeting with George Washington, in which they called him to form a new army to fight the war against the British rule. So these are just kind of big events that happened throughout. And then we have July 4th, 1776, where the Congress in Philadelphia issued the Declaration of Independence, in which British rule of the 13 colonies was renounced. So again, this is all happening during his reign.
That sucks.
Yeah. The Continental Army seceded in taking Boston before a British counterattack led to the siege of New York City in 1777. And then we had the Battle of Saratoga in New York, in which thousands of British troops were captured. This war expanded, so France allied with the Continental Congress in 1775. I think is that number. Guys, my writing was really bad. This is bad. Okay, so if I typed it, it would have been worse because I wouldn't have fixed typos. So I'd be like, what are you talking about? This would go on. I don't even remember what I was talking about. The Battle of Saratoga would lead to a war that would last for 3 more years. And the Spanish also took American side, just like France. Course.
We both know why the Spanish wanted to, because they hated Britain and they're like,
yeah,
oh, we still have Florida.
Exactly.
Better keep an eye on Florida.
Yep. And then we have the Battle of Yorktown, which was the last battle in the Revolutionary War, in which the Americans won after a 3-week siege. The British troops surrendered. So I'm sorry. I give up. Okay, so fast forward 2 years later, 1783, we have members of the Continental Congress and George III's ideas of government, where they actually agreed that the Treaty of Paris should be in the French capital. So they actually were able to agree on something. That's good. Now, Great Britain now acknowledged the United States of America, and they now had borders that were established between the two. So, no more America for Mr. George.
Boo.
So he was technically America's last king. Now, because British won, that's what the documentary was called that I tried to watch, by the way.
Yeah.
American's Last King. So, because the British won in the 7 Years' War in 1763, Britain was the dominant colonial power in New France and in India. Even though they lost a lot during it, they didn't lose. So, the British Royal Navy was still the major power on the seas, and they could defend all the way to the South Atlantic. So they're like, we got this. Like, we can protect ourselves on sea. We got this.
Britain did have a really good navy.
Yeah, at least they had something going for them, you know?
Yeah.
Can't argue with that. The Britons then started moving to Australia and New Zealand. They found this new area and they're like, ooh, I like kangaroos. So the increasing dominance reflected well on George's reign because they're like, wow, he's doing so many great things. Of course, it's going to reflect, again, on the leader, whether things are going good or bad. It's always them.
Literally.
And so they're like, wow, George, good job. Good job doing all this. But George was like, oh, I have a really hard life. And he has a lot of personal issues going on at this time.
Yeah.
So just a little bit more about good old George. He was deeply religious. That was kind of his big thing that he was known for. Mm-hmm. He prayed a lot. He was a family man. He truly cared about his kids. It wasn't just like, they're fine. I feel like if you have 15 kids, you kind of have to. You can't really ignore them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And he had a healthy lifestyle. He ate well. He had a good diet, and he exercised. But in the early 1760s, many people reported him acting weird. He started getting a lot of anger issues, and he just was described to be out of character. That's the best way people could say it.
Yeah.
In the mid-1780s, many questioned if they could even trust him to rule because he just kept getting crazier. A lot of times he would try to talk to the people and like his sentences didn't make any sense. And they'd be like, what? Or he would repeat the same thing over and over again. And they'd be like, what? So they got to a point where they're just like, how can we trust you if you're losing your mind? His madness might have been caused by porphyria, which is like a disease of the liver, where the toxins in the system can lead to mental illness. The reason why they thought he had this was because he had purple urine sometimes.
Oh.
So if you have purple urine, you probably have porphyria. Ask your doctor about porphyria. I wonder if there's a cure now. I'm sure there is. But anyway, they don't know for sure if that's what he had, obviously, because they don't have the medicines. They don't have the doctors we do now. But that's something that now, like, people have been able to see. That's probably what he had. But I think he also had a mix of other things, too. Mm-hmm. So he had several severe and increasing chronic mania episodes. He would just start freaking out. He would start screaming. And the kids and Charlotte would just be like, you okay? And then he would just be like, yeah. And it would just be done.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so he's just like slowly going crazy, and nobody knows what caused his madness. In 1788, the king was named as dangerously ill, resulting in a crisis within the British state. Everyone started freaking out. They don't know what to do because this had never happened before with the ruler. So they're like, how do we handle this? Like, do we just let him rule? Or do we get rid of him? But that's insensitive of us. Like, what are we supposed to do? And that's where I'm ending part 1. Because you're going to have to find out what happens next.
Chaos.
Pretty much. So a lot of politics, but like we got there. Part 2 will not have as much politics. It's going to be more about like his suffering, his life. But of course there is still drama with France. There always is.
Drama.
In Ireland. So anyway, that's part 1 of good old King George III.
Exciting. Where can you find us?
You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at History of the Podcast. And you can also email us at historyofthepodcast@gmail.com.
Yay.
Jamie and I have some good ideas for TikTokies, so make sure you follow us on TikTok. It's going to be funny.
I am not an actress.
That's why I think we should make it cheesy on purpose. I think it's going to be funny. Okay. So anyway, stay tuned.
We will catch you next week for part 2.
Yeah. Part 2. Bye.